Welcome everyone to another episode of the Famvestor podcast. I'm excited today because I get to kind of live out a dream that I've shared with Sunmarie through someone else's experience. We have Nancy Vogel on the show, and she has taken her family of four, and this is a couple of years ago, but she took a family of four. They rode bikes all the way from Alaska to Argentina, 17,000 miles through 15 countries over a span of 1,000 days, 3 years on the road with twins, a family of four, and they had two 10-year-old boys when they started the journey, and they went from Alaska to Argentina. I believe, Nancy, welcome to the show, and you guys set a Guinness World Record, right, by doing this?
Right, yeah, our boys now hold the world record as the youngest people to cycle the length of the Americas.
That is so awesome. Nancy, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just, it's like I've said, it's something that I've told somebody, I want to bike across the country with my boys. Nothing as grandiose as 17,000 miles, but I'm so glad that you're on the show, that we can kind of dig into this family adventure that you had.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, first off, when people hear about this, they're just first they're probably just spinning in their head, wait, really? What did it just say? But what maybe to start off with, because, we're all about family, finance, and freedom, just maybe what inspired this journey?
I think that's the hardest question to answer. And of course, that's the one you had to start with. There's always going to be a lot of different factors that will go into something that big. Mm-hmm. Now, I am actually going to take this back 2 years before we left from Alaska. Mm-hmm. When our twin boys were 8, they were just finishing up grade 2. We made the decision to take off on the bicycles. And that actually was the hard decision. Now, 2 years later, when we decided to do Alaska and Argentina, that was easy. But when we first made the decision, we spent the boys' third grade year cycling around the US and Mexico. And that was the decision that I really wrestled with. That was the one where it was so out of the box, and it was so different, and it was definitely not the expected path. It was not what we as parents were expected to do.
Right.
My father-in-law had died in December, and I think that the fact that John's dad died kind of led him to reevaluate his own mortality, the legacy he had with his kids, the amount of time he had with his kids. I think he was realizing that time was passing quickly, and if he didn't take advantage of the time with the boys now, he would lose that opportunity. And so a few months later, it was in March, my husband brought up the idea of taking off and spending a year biking around the U.S.
Wow.
The boys were 8, and I, of course, thought he was nuts. That's not what we do, right? As parents, that's not what we do. We have been taught by our society that we need to do the responsible thing. And of course, my husband and I were both school teachers. The responsible thing was to teach school, and the boys would go to school, and in the evening we'd take them to soccer practice and fix a quick dinner, and throw a load of laundry in the washing machine, and collapse into bed exhausted. And then the next day you get up and you do the whole thing again. Mm-hmm. And that's what we had been taught. That's what was expected. Mm-hmm. And I have really fallen into that. Mm-hmm. I am a parent. A parent does not quit their job, throw their kids on the back of a bicycle built for 3 and take off and ride around America. That's not what a parent does.
Right.
So I really wrestled with the idea. My husband kept talking about it, and I kept thinking he was crazy. And at one point we went over to visit my mother, and he turned to my mom and he said, Nancy and I are thinking about taking next year off and biking around America. And I looked at him and said, which Nancy are you talking about? This was not, I thought this was just some pipe dream that he was, some fantasy. But that was the moment when I realized he was serious, when I realized that he really seriously was wanting to do this. And so then I started thinking about it. And when I started thinking about it, I realized that he wasn't the crazy one. The crazy one was me. I was the one who had bought into these societal expectations. I was the one who was spending all of my time and energy on other people's kids as a school teacher. And then I didn't have time for my own kids. I was the one who was running myself ragged because society was expecting that, not so much that I wanted to do it, but that I was just expected to do it.
Right.
And when I finally kind of wrapped my head around that and I changed my thinking, I'm like, you know what, this makes sense. So we went down, we ordered a custom built bicycle built for 3 so that John and the 2 boys could be on one bike and I would be on another bike. We spent a year biking around the US and Mexico. And on that trip, we made the decision that we wanted to do Alaska to Argentina, but we needed to reconfigure the bikes. We needed to, just kind of do some other stuff. So we came back home for a year, got everything put together, and then we did the Alaska to Argentina.
Wow. How did your children handle the change from going from a very ordinary run-of-the-mill lifestyle, go to school in the morning, come home, to being on the road at age 8, biking across the country and being in a new place every night? How did they handle all of that?
Were they excited, and did that enthusiasm fade if they were excited?
I think 8-year-old kids don't question it. They just, Mom and Dad say we're going to get on a bicycle and ride around America. Okay, fine, we'll get on a bicycle and ride around America. Kids don't question that, right? So for them, it just was. Now, we did have, after we first started, we were probably, a month in or so, and Davey was really missing his friends. And, he was kind of, I don't know that I want to do this. It was hot. We were going through Eastern Oregon, 106 degrees, through the desert. It was miserable. It really was. And he was kind of like, I don't want to do this. And I said, you know what? We're going to be riding down the coast. When we get down to Disneyland, we will go to Disneyland. And he's like, okay, good enough. And that was it. He never questioned it again.
There's a gold at the end of the rainbow.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
So you tell this story, and it sounds like something everyone always talks about. They always talk about travel, about living their life as an adventure, but there's all these things to stop you. There's all these routines that you get stuck in. People fear about money, a year on the road, how do you even finance something like that? And you just, push it off. There's other fears, you're going to be failed, you're going to get ridiculed, there's danger, there's all these unknowns. So it's amazing to hear how you guys, just did it anyway, and just the adventure you were able to have because of it.
How was that the first year? How did you set yourself up to enable yourself to take a whole year off? Did you take a leave from your jobs, or did you actually quit and then the future was unknown? And how did you handle expenses?
We quit. We just quit.
Wow.
That said, I need to qualify that because I was a special ed teacher, and as a special ed teacher, I knew that I could go any place, anytime, and get a job. In fact, when we had lived overseas, when I first moved back to the U.S. in February, I put in my application for the following school year with one of the local districts. And as soon as I put it in, they said, oh, a special ed teacher has just moved into the area. We will create a position for you. They didn't have a special ed teacher right then, but they created a position for me because they were hoping to get me into the district right then. So I knew that I could always get a job as a special ed teacher. There was no question there. Now, that helped tremendously, knowing that that was there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know that we would have done that had we not had that security.
Right.
But knowing that we had it, that was huge.
Mm-hmm.
As far as how we had it, I mean, we had always just saved our whole lives. People had said, you need to save for retirement. We were older when our kids were born. I was 37 when they were born. John was 42.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were older parents, and we had always saved all the way through our lives. It was never an organized thing. I know you guys talk a lot about how to plan for retirement and how to save and how to invest and how to do all this stuff. And we're like, screw all that stuff. Like, I don't know anything about it. But we just lived frugally and saved whatever we could. And so then when we decided to take a year off from teaching, it was like, well, we do have the money, and we knew we were saving it for retirement, but we also knew our kids were getting older, and we knew that if we didn't take advantage of that opportunity now, we would lose that opportunity. And so we made the decision that we would spend some of our retirement money in order to have time with the kids. Does that make sense?
That does.
Yeah.
That's a valuable point that you bring up, and the trade-off there. There's only so much saving that's worth doing if you're shortchanging your life, the experiences that you could be having with your children right now, just to save for some far off future when you're 80 years old, So I think that that's a very valid point, is to find what truly makes you feel alive, and making sure your focus financially is on those areas too, really creating those memories with your children that you'll never be able to have that time again. So I think that's so wise of you to have come to that conclusion.
And I think it's awesome you didn't let it be a roadblock.
Right.
Yeah. But I think I did hear at some point when I was researching your story, because I was just fascinated, that on your 3-year journey, you actually rented out your house. And then on the road, you somehow bought more rental properties to get, I guess, more income coming in. I don't know how that works when you're on bicycles and you're buying houses. But if you can just explain that a little bit.
Well, that's where our story kind of takes this very bizarre turn. So we were planning this 3-year trip. So it was a school year, I think, in terms of school years, because we were teachers. So
right.
The school year 2007, 2008 was that year between the 1-year trip and then going to Alaska. So that's right before that big economic crash, right? So we're looking at finances. I'm looking at how much money we have saved, and okay, we have X amount saved, and at X interest rate, that means we'll be getting this much money, whatever it was. I don't know the numbers, but we'll be getting this much money. And we couldn't quite live on that, but it was a decent amount. And then we had our house, and our house was paid for. We had gotten the house from my mom.
Nice.
So the house was paid for, and we didn't want to leave the house empty for 3 years.
Right.
So it was like, well, do we want to sell it? No, because it was my childhood home. I didn't want to get rid of it, but we didn't want it to sit empty. So what do we do? And so then we thought, well, we can rent it, and that will help with this finance issue. We have a certain amount of interest that we can use, plus we have the house. So as we were doing our planning, we calculated this much from the house and this much from interest on the savings. And between those two, it would more or less cover our expenses, more or less. If we had to tap into savings a little bit, we were fine. That was fine. We could do that. But it wasn't like 3 years of just completely living off our savings, right? So we take off. And we left in June of 2008. Well, a few months later, the big crash happened. And we were still okay because we had most of our money, a lot of our in CDs. And at that time, the interest rate on CDs was like 5.5%. So we were okay. So we were okay for a while. Now, fast forward to about 2000, I don't know, late 2009 probably. And one of my CDs comes due, so I go to reinvest it, and the interest rate was down to 0.5%.
Oh boy.
Holy cripes. I mean, that kind of takes the wind out of your sails, you know? So
Sure.
now we're sitting there going, our entire life savings, and we're going to get $500 interest for the year. Like, this was not sustainable. This was not something we could do.
Right.
And so I remember riding my bike. We were in Ecuador at the time. And I remember riding my bike. Actually, it started when we were in Colombia. So I'm riding the bike along these back roads in Colombia and Ecuador. And I'm thinking, what can we do? Like, how can we somehow get more income? I mean, we had the rent coming in every month from our house, but that was it. We had no other income coming in. Do we call off the trip? Do we not? Do we just go ahead and spend more of our savings? Do we, what do we do? And I'm thinking, my dad used to always tell me, make your money work for you. And that had always meant, in my dad's mind, that had always meant invest it and get the interest. Like that's, he was always saying, make your money work for you. But that, in his mind, that's what it was.
Right.
So I'm riding along these back roads in South America, and I'm thinking, how can I make our money work for us? Like, what does that mean? Like, everything, this crash has just happened, and our house wasn't renting for what we had originally planned for. Initially, when we had initially talked with property managers, they thought they'd be able to rent the house for $1,400, and now it's renting for $950. So, that income was really low. Now we have no interest on our savings. So I'm pedaling along, and my mind is just turning. What does that mean? What does that mean? How can I make my money work for me? And finally, I thought, well, can I do anything else with the rent? There was no way that we could increase the rent, because then we wouldn't have tenants.
Right.
But I thought, well, then at the same time, I was hearing these reports that the housing market had really crashed in the U.S. And we thought, well, what if we could somehow buy another house and get rent from another house? And so we ended up, through a network, we ended up finding a realtor. And anyway, that's that. We ended up buying 2 houses while we were down in South America.
Wow. So you bought them sight unseen through, I guess, a realtor who scouted them out for you.
Well, we had our property manager that was managing our house, and we loved her, absolutely loved her, and we trusted her 100%. So she had a good friend who was a real estate agent. So the 2 of them went out looking for houses. And Sherry, of course, knew what a good rental would be, because she was a property manager. And then her friend knew about just the market and buying the houses. So with the 2 of them together, they were able to buy the houses, and we just kind of signed papers via fax, and that was that.
That's crazy.
As soon as we owned the houses, they literally handed the keys to the property manager. Like, we didn't see them until we got back to the U.S.
Wow.
That's crazy. Do you still own those properties today?
We sold one of them about 6-7 months ago.
Okay.
But the other one we still own, yeah.
That's amazing.
That is.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
I know.
Fantastic.
That's a crazy story. That's where I say it's kind of like everything kind of just this big shift, but it worked.
So that rental income kind of sustained you with just those rental checks, instead of 1 check, now you have 3 checks coming. That sustained you for the rest of that journey?
Right.
Okay. Awesome.
Fantastic.
And then when we came back to the U.S., that changed our life when we came back here as well, because our thought all along was that we would come back and go back to teaching. But now all of a sudden we have the rent coming from 3 houses, and they were all paid for. We had gotten the houses at such a steep discount because it was during that crash. And so, yeah, we ended up not going back to teaching.
Wow.
That's so
fantastic.
Crazy.
It really is. It's an inspiring story and very eye-opening for those who are, trying to think of ways to to get out of the 9 to 5 hamster wheel, you know? I mean, this is one way, and you can do so much with your life with that kind of freedom.
It's amazing that inspiration came to you while you're biking on the road in a foreign country. And but yeah, I feel like just you know, when I go running, I feel like I always get my best ideas. So I can see how that could happen.
Right. You have a lot of time to think. You're doing this very focused, methodical movement of riding your bike and pondering life's biggest questions, and there you found your answers.
Exactly. That is exactly it. Yes.
That is so cool.
So let's dig more into this epic journey.
Right. Like, okay, so I'm just imagining, you know, 1,000 days on the road. Is like a majority of these days spent, you know, going from hotel to hotel to motel to motel? Are you guys camping? What's going on?
That varied completely, depending on where we were. So we camped out almost exclusively through Alaska, Canada, the U.S., and northern Mexico. Mm-hmm. Then by the time we got down to southern Mexico, 2 things happened. One was it was just outrageously hot. So having 4 of us crammed into the tent was just a sweat fest, and nobody slept.
Nobody wants that.
No, it was miserable. But at the same time, hotels were cheap enough that we were able to afford hotels. Mm-hmm. So all through the tropics then, we went from hotel to hotel. And then we started camping again. Did a little bit of camping in Peru, but basically once we got to Bolivia and Argentina is when we really started camping.
Wow. And, you know, we talked about this journey. It's 1,000 days it took you. You went 17,000 miles. So that's about 17 miles a day. How far do you think on average you were going?
Well, we took a lot of days off.
Okay.
At some point, at one point I calculated it, and I don't know, we actually cycled something like 48% of the days.
Okay.
Which means 52% of the days we didn't cycle at all. Okay. So, you know, we took a lot of time off. You know, a typical day was, although there is no such thing as a typical
I'm
day,
sure.
but I would say kind of a typical day was 30 to 50 miles. We could go farther than that, and there were times when we did. But what we found was if we tried to push it too hard, Mother Nature made sure we were going to take time off because one of us would get sick. And so we kind of just settled into like 30 to 50 miles a day was kind of a, you know, a good distance that we could maintain. And so we just slowly we weren't in any hurry. So we just slowly made progress. Just we were in no rush to get down to the tip of South America at all.
Right.
Did you methodically go day by day biking, or did you get to a place and say, hey, I really like it here, let's spend a week here, and then, you know, reevaluate when we want to set out again? Did you have any of those kind of bigger pauses?
Well, there's a certain amount of logistical stuff involved in that. By that, I mean, like Argentina is the most dramatic in Alaska, but in Argentina, you've got a big city approximately every 300 miles or so. So you have to load up. You go to a supermarket and you buy enough food to get through those next 5 or 6 days to the next big city. And then you have no choice but to get to the next city. I mean, like if I estimated it was going to be 5 days, I would usually get 6 days worth of food in case something happened, but we couldn't stop any longer than that. We just couldn't do it because we didn't have enough food.
Wow.
And when in tiny, itty bitty, teeny tiny little towns, okay, you can get some potatoes and onions, but that's about all you're going to find. And so a lot of the stops end up being dictated by just sheer logistics.
Interesting.
And when you're talking about getting food, you know, for 5 or 6 days, you can't refrigerate this food on bike. So what are you buying, and are you cooking most meals, or are you stopping at, you know, McDonald's and stuff like that?
And again, that really varied depending on where we were. So through the northern part, through the U.S. and Canada, we cooked almost all the time. It was rare that we would go to a restaurant. We almost always cooked. But then once you get in the tropics, of course, the hotels are so cheap, but the restaurants are also so cheap. And restaurants are very plentiful. So then you start going to restaurants because it's easier, it's cheaper, it's healthier. There just was no reason to be pulling out the stove and having to deal with all that hassle.
Right.
And then once we got, especially down in like Bolivia, the restaurants weren't as prevalent. They weren't as common. There weren't as many of them. And so then we started having to cook again.
When you were cooking those meals kind of in the origin or the start of your journey or through the U.S., I'm just curious because I go camping all the time. What kind of meals are you cooking? What's breakfast? What's lunch? What's dinner? Are you even having 3 meals? Or are you just doing 2?
It was mostly 2 and then a lot of snack. Well, I don't know. I would say 1 and then a lot of snacks. What we found was taking the time to eat breakfast before we left was just downtime that didn't really benefit us at all. So what we would do is we would just get packed up and we'd take off and we'd ride for an hour or 2 and then we'd stop and eat something. And a lot of times that was fruit or, like in the U.S., we'd get granola bars or something like that. A lot of nuts or dried fruit. And then we'd ride however far we're going to ride. And again, we took a lot of breaks. And generally speaking, whenever we stopped for a break, I would pull out something, whether that was granola bars or nuts or apples with peanut butter. Sometimes I'd get like just raw broccoli. And if we could get some sort of a dip and have raw broccoli with dip, that was great. So, and then in the evening, once we stopped, we would actually have a meal.
Wow.
What kind of meal were the dinner? Am I digging into this too much?
If we cooked, and that varied. I mean, if we were out in the middle of nowhere, like we frequently would camp out, just on the side of the road somewhere, like the rice-a-roni type thing, the side aisle of the grocery store was our friend. Like, I loved that aisle. I'd get maybe some rice-a-roni, or I'd get like mashed potatoes, or I'd get, there's all those sides. And then we could have maybe some canned chicken and some vegetables. So the first couple of days, like let's say we have a 6-day stretch before we get to another supermarket, I would carry fresh vegetables for the first couple of days. So I would always have some potatoes and some onions and carrots, and I would carry fresh vegetables for the first few days. And then by the end of it, by the 6th day, we're down to all dried food. But those first few days, I always tried to have fresh food.
That's so
but it just varied depending on where we were.
Yeah.
How did you manage your bikes along the route? Did you carry spare tires with you? Did you find that the bikes broke after a certain amount of miles and you had to replace them? How did that work out for you?
My husband is really good about just maintaining the bike. So every little while he would go through and do just regular maintenance, tighten up all the bolts, figure out all the... You want to say hi, Mo? Say hi. Say hi.
For those not viewing, Nancy has her dog with her.
Yes, he's good company here.
My little guy.
I'm sure he didn't accompany you on the 17,000-mile journey, though.
This one didn't. He came into our lives when he got back here. But anyway, now he just jumped down. So we're good.
So I'm curious too. You had this first, like when they were in 3rd grade or 2nd grade, you had this first U.S. adventure and Mexico adventure, and then you had the much longer 3-year adventure. What were the major changes and lessons learned that you kind of incorporated into that 3-year journey? Was there anything significant that came that you did differently?
Well, we reconfigured the bicycles completely. For the 1 year trip, the first trip, we had a bicycle built for three. So my husband and two kids were on the same bike.
Cool.
And then I had my own bike. For the other one, we had a tandem for my husband and one of the boys. The other boy had his own bike and I had my own bike. So we went from two bikes to three bikes. We had trailers. We had two trailers on the 3 year trip so that we could carry more gear.
Mm-hmm.
It was, like I said earlier, that first trip was the hard one. That was where we were learning what in the heck we were doing. How do you do this? So the 3 year Alaska to Argentina was actually, that was fairly easy for us, which I know that sounds really weird, but after having worked out all the kinks on that first trip.
Right. Why a tandem bike and a 3-person bike as opposed to everyone having their own bikes?
When we were going to do the Alaska to Argentina, we talked with the boys and said, what do you want? We could go with two tandems and have one kid with each parent. We were open to all options, and we said, what do you want? And Daryl immediately said, I want a tandem. And Davey said, I want my own bike. And we said, okay.
As simple as that.
Choice.
Can I ask, it's quite the spectrum you're traveling from Alaska, which is kind of wilderness country, down through Canada and the United States, which is, I think we all understand because we live here, and then down into South America and Central America. How did you handle feeling safe and secure through all these different countries, all these different environments, so many variables? Was there ever a moment where you felt you weren't safe? How did you handle that kind of situation, especially camping? I feel, you're out there, you're out in the elements with nothing but a bike and a tent, and I feel like especially in a lot of foreign countries where maybe you don't speak the language, it can be quite intimidating and you might be concerned for your safety.
Okay. First off, I want to say, in general, everybody, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, I've traveled all over the world and I have seen it all over. Everybody tends to believe that here, where I live, is safe. And there, where they live, is not safe. Okay. So when you're riding through Central America, when you're in Belize, everybody says, oh, in Belize, it's fine. But in Guatemala, it's really dangerous. And when you get to Guatemala, they say, oh, in Guatemala, it's fine. But in Honduras, it's really dangerous. And in Honduras, they say, oh, in Honduras, it's fine. But in Nicaragua, it's dangerous, right? So that is something you're always going to get. And you have to look beyond that, okay? My basic thinking in terms of that is, if Maria is safe in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, why should I think I am not going to be safe in Tegucigalpa? I mean, is Tegucigalpa inherently more dangerous? And the dangers are different, perhaps. In one area, you might be in danger of getting malaria. In another area, there's a different danger. In the US, you're in danger of a random gun shooting. So the dangers are different, but there are dangers no matter where you are. Okay. So that being said, there were basically two instances in the entire 3 years where we were fearful. One was up in northern British Columbia in Canada. We were cycling around, out in the middle of nowhere, and there was a bear. We had seen lots of bears. In general, bears aren't a problem. You don't bother the bears. They don't bother you. But this particular bear, I'm not going to bore you with the details of the story, but long story short, I was face to face with the bear, literally 2 feet from my side.
Whoa.
Wow.
And then eventually, and again, it's a long story, but eventually the bear was chasing my son down the road. And
Oh gosh.
my mother instinct kicked in, and I go chasing after him, and the two of us were pedaling down the road as fast as our legs would carry us as this bear was chasing after us.
Wow.
So, it happens.
My goodness.
And you deal with it, and life goes on.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unlikely. The chance that it would happen that once was so slim.
Mm-hmm.
So realistically, you either let those things stop you or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The other incident was different in that there's this one particular town in Peru that was very notorious within the bicycle touring community. There was a local family there that was going out on the road and hijacking bicycle tourists, stealing their bikes, stealing their gear, stealing everything, and just leaving them on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stories, they were robbed at knife point, others at gunpoint. I don't know if there were two different families who were doing this or if it was one family and sometimes they used a knife and sometimes they used a gun. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very concerned as we were approaching this area, as one would be.
Mm-hmm.
And what it appeared happened was these families that were doing this were watching out, and they would see the cyclists come into town, and then they would give them 30 minutes or so to get out into the cornfields on the other side of town. And then they would go out, and once you're in the middle of nowhere, they would rob you.
Mm-hmm.
So we did things very differently. We rode into town and stayed there for the night.
Mm-hmm.
Now we were, a bit on edge. I'm not going to say we weren't. We went to a hotel. As we were moving things into the hotel, normally we would have like one person stay with the bikes while the other three were working on ferrying gear up to the hotel. And that time we had three of us staying to guard the bikes when only one was ferrying stuff up the steps into the hotel room. So, we were kind of on edge. But then the next morning, I actually went down to the police station and said, hey, we're cycling through. We're leaving town today. Would you escort us out of town? And they said, yeah, we'll be there in about 30 minutes. And 30 minutes later, the police car arrived and they stayed with us until we were out of the danger zone.
So we kind of talked about maybe some of the dangers and ugly side there, but I'm sure, on this journey, there must have been so many times when there was like surprise help, surprise instances of human kindness. I'm just wondering if there's any things that stand out in your mind about those times and how it was being on the road, bicycling as a family.
How much time do you have? No, seriously. And I really think, and I'm glad that you asked that question because people always ask about the scary moments. People are always asking, oh, were you in danger or whatever? But there were far, far, far more moments of magic. I mean, it was just magic. There's no other way to put it. Riding down the road one day and this car pulls up next to us and says, hey, do you want to sleep at my house tonight? And so we ends up being an ER doctor and we end up spending a couple of days with him and his kids.
Wow.
It could be things like somebody, they've got a pickup load of fresh oranges and they start throwing oranges at us so that we fill our panniers with oranges. I think my favorite story though is, I call them my Gatorade angels. We were actually cycling through Baja California.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I fully understood before we started down there just how remote this area was. And so we were just heading out at one point. As you're cycling down Baja, there's a point where you're going down the coast and then you kind of cross over the Baja to the other coast. Well, as you're crossing across the peninsula, it's actually a really, really remote area, and there's really just nothing out there at all. And I expected it to be remote, but I'm not sure that I expected it to be as remote as it ended up being. And so I had water, and I probably had enough water, but it was one of those. So I'm going along and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like this is more remote than I thought it was going to be. And then at one point I saw a pickup truck on the side of the road ahead of us. And, we kind of just started going out and around the pickup truck. And this guy hands me this bottle of Gatorade, I'm like, so I stopped and he's like, here, have some Gatorade. And I said, oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. And he gives Gatorade to everybody. And I start talking with this guy and he says, yeah, he says, here, have some more Gatorade. He says, this is all yours. And he points to this whole huge case of Gatorade in the back of his pickup truck. And I'm sitting there going, like, I am so confused. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is all ours. And he said, yeah, he says, we bought all of this before we left Ensenada. We bought all of this for you. But here's the deal. We know that you can't carry it all. We know that you're on the bikes and you can't carry this much Gatorade. So here's what we're going to do. Every 10 miles or so, we're going to build a rock cairn on the side of the road. And we'll go back a few meters back off the side of the road and we'll hide 4 bottles of Gatorade for you.
That's amazing.
So for the next 3 days, we would find these cairns on the side of the road and we'd go back and we'd find 4 brightly colored bottles of Gatorade, like little Easter eggs, hiding underneath the sagebrush.
The ultimate Easter egg hunt.
It was just incredible. It was like the most amazing thing. And, these were just normal people who saw a need and they realized that they could fill that need, and so they did. And we got that all the time. I mean, we were down in Argentina and we're cycling along, and all of a sudden the storm just moved in. We were just like out in the middle of nowhere. The storm, I mean, wind like you wouldn't believe, and rain, and we're standing there on the side of the road like, what are we going to do? And this gaucho comes up. I mean, stereotypical gaucho with like exactly, you think stereotypical gaucho, that's how this man was dressed. And
he wasn't on a horse, was he?
No, he was walking actually, but he was dressed exactly like what you would expect, just stereotypical gaucho. And he came up and he's like, you obviously need a place to go, and I happen to have the shed over here. And he drags us off to his shed, and it's actually this shed where he dries his sheep pelts. And so we spent the night in this little shed with all the rafters up above us with all these old sheep pelts hanging, drying. And
wow.
But that kind of stuff, I honestly could spend days telling you stories about the goodness, about the people who just reached out in so many ways. I mean, people who were literally willing to give up days of their lives to help us out, and then other people who would just take 10 minutes and give us a bunch of oranges or tomatoes. And but it was like everybody reached out as they felt they could, or as they saw a need that they felt they could fill.
That's amazing. So cool to hear that.
It's wonderful to hear that, there's so much good, and that anywhere you go in the world, especially in a way, a vulnerable situation, there you are with your family, you're riding your bikes across continents, and these, just perfect strangers come out and just open their hearts and open their homes to you to help you, and to just, appreciate having, you there. And I think that that's just so beautiful that you could experience that, it's like one big global family.
Well, and I think people are very protective as well, especially when there's kids involved. People are protective. I remember one time this was on that first trip where the kids were on the triple bike, and we crossed into Mexico. And the road going down, we crossed at Tijuana, and the road just kind of funnels you in, and so we're on this like massive highway. Cars are whizzing by, it's just like this constant stream of cars. And then we get up to a point where we're on the main highway. So there's like 3 lanes of traffic and we're on the shoulder here. And now 2 lanes of traffic are coming from our right. So it's an on-ramp coming on, but it's 2 lanes. And here we are on these bikes. We have 3 lanes of traffic on this side and 2 lanes of traffic coming in here. And we're kind of sandwiched in the middle. And it's like, these cars are going 1,000,000 miles an hour and it's very daunting. And it's just like, help, what do we do? It was just like, we were like starting to panic. We didn't know how we were going to get out of the situation. And then all of a sudden, the traffic from the right of those 2 lanes on the right just stopped.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is kind of weird, So I turn and I look and there's a police car who has positioned himself right smack dab in the middle of the road. He's got his lights on and he is stopping all of that traffic that's coming on those 2 lanes. He's just stopping all of those cars so that we can cross those 2 lanes and get over on the far right shoulder again.
Wow.
And as soon as we get onto that far right shoulder, then he moves over and he jumps in right behind us and he lets all the cars go. Huh. Well, this man stayed behind us. We're on the shoulder. And again, now we've got 5 lanes of traffic. Just, the cars going like crazy. And we're on this far right shoulder. And it's just this crazy, wild situation. And this police car is just staying right behind us. And we didn't know what was going on. But we're like, what do you do, right? You're in Mexico. This policeman is behind you. You just go, because what else do you do, right? So we're riding along and he probably stayed behind us for, I'm going to say, probably a mile or 2.
Wow.
And then we get to a point where we start to climb up a big hill and the shoulder widens out to it's a nice wide shoulder. And as soon as we hit that nice wide shoulder, this police car comes right up beside us. They turn on their loudspeaker and they said, "Have a nice day."
Wow.
And they took off.
Oh, wow.
So I think people are very protective, and I have more stories like that. I have story after story after story of just people of all walks of life who just helped us as they could.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Nancy, I'm curious, I feel like your kids just sound amazing to do a 17,000-mile journey at 10 years old. We were just hiking last weekend, and there's these parents with backpacks carrying their 6, 7, 8-year-olds on their packs because I'm guessing they just don't want to walk or won't hike. And I'm wondering, these parents listen to this journey and they just think it's crazy. Like, how do you have any advice for parents who are like struggling with that, or like how are your kids able to do this, day after day?
So quite a grueling challenge to take youngsters, not only for them, but for you as the parent, on an adventure of this scope. Or even half of this scope would be quite an adventure to tackle.
I feel like our kids are usually pretty good, actually. But some, even after 4 or 5 miles, a lot of them start, complaining or whining. And I'm wondering what your experience there was.
How'd you keep the morale up?
I get that question a lot, and I don't really have a good answer for it. I think that kids, by and large, just kind of follow after their parents. Mm-hmm. Whatever their parents do is what the kids do. And again, most of this was set during that first trip, so that when the kids were in 3rd grade, that trip around the U.S. and Mexico was when those kinds of things happened. John and I were struggling, trying to figure out how to make it all happen. Like, how do you juggle the demands of cycling and setting up camp and cooking over a stove and buying food? Like, where do you buy food? Getting water, finding a place to shower. There's so much that goes into it. And so just trying to figure out how to juggle all of that was really hard on our part. The kids, they just, for the most part, just do what they're told to do.
Mm-hmm.
And not even necessarily told to do, but just what they're expected to
Right.
do. I mean, it's just that's what kids do.
Yeah, you didn't put any of these limiting beliefs on them that they couldn't do it, so they just did it.
Yeah. And we did have a situation fairly early on. We're going through eastern Oregon. It was like 105 degrees in eastern Oregon. It's like desert. It's hot.
Wow.
There's no water. There's no shade. I mean, it's just you're out there in the blazing sun all day long. And Davey at one point just kind of got tired of it. He was missing his friends. This was just a couple of weeks in.
Mm-hmm.
But he was kind of just tired of it, and he was wanting to go back home. And I just said, hey, when we get down to LA, I'll take you to Disneyland. And he said, okay, he's good to go. No, I don't think he realized that Disneyland is 1,000 miles away, and 1,000 miles on a bicycle is a long way. And, I don't think he understood the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it was, sure, if I can go to Disneyland, I'll get on a bike and ride. Like, sure, why not? And that was it. I mean, and that was for the Alaska to Argentina trip. It never, ever, 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 ever came up because they had made the decision that they were going to do this trip, and that was that. They never questioned that. Now, I kind of hit bottom 3 times where it was kind of like, I was kind of seriously questioning calling it off. But the kids never, not even once. They never. The Alaska to Argentina, they never questioned it.
Now they knew they were going for a Guinness World Record, right?
Right.
Could perhaps that was part of the motivation too that kept them plugging along? What do you think?
I think so. Davey's right here. Davey, how much of the motivation on the trip was because you were getting the world record? Basically none.
Wow, cool.
I mean, it just sounds like an awesome, cool adventure. And
right.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember my 10-year-old brain, but I just feel like that'd be so cool to do.
A real epic adventure, for sure.
Yeah.
It was really a pretty amazing experience.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you just mentioned some things, pots, pans, and I know, I'm sure a lot of the audience is listening. Like, what are you actually carrying? Like, can you offer like a quick checklist off the top of your head of what you're bringing? And we know we have bikes, we know we have helmets. I'm assuming tents, pots, pans, saddlebags, clothes. What is it looking like?
We had the bike, and John's pretty good about maintenance issues, and so he was able to, for the most part, anticipate which things we might need, like which parts are going to wear out, or and so he had replacements of those. Clothes, we each had maybe 3 outfits of clothes. We had rain gear so that if it was rainy we could get that. We did carry our winter jackets the whole way, even through Central America. It was hot. We knew we weren't going to need them. As far as homeschooling stuff, we did carry math books with us. We had just some spiral notebooks that the kids would write in, but we didn't carry a ton of homeschool materials. Food, I had 1 pot and I had 1 spoon, and then we each had a bowl. So I had 4 bowls so that when we would make soup or whatever, we'd each have our own bowl. We did have tents and sleeping bags and all of that. I mean, everything we needed. We didn't have anything extra, but we had everything we needed.
How did you handle laundry along the way? Did you wash it and wear it? Did you find laundromats? How did you manage that?
Through Alaska, Canada, and then into the U.S., we would stop at a laundromat. So whenever we were going through a small town or whatever, we would stop at the laundromat and just wash everything. And sometimes we literally washed everything. Like, we'd put on our rain jackets because we were washing all of our clothes. But then once we got down into Mexico, laundromats weren't really a thing. And so for the most part, I would take clothes in the shower, and I just kind of stomp on them on the shower floor, wash them in the sink, in the wherever I could. If we were in an area where there were a lot of streams, maybe I would wash clothes in the stream, but I didn't do that very often. Mostly it was like in the sink or the shower.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember on our on our 3-week trip backpacking through Europe, we each brought one pair of pants and just synthetic and wool clothing that we would just wash in the sink, and then it'd be dry by morning, and it was great.
Right, exactly. You find out you don't need much.
Right. So Nancy, I'm curious to dig into more of maybe the education homeschooling aspect, because I'm sure a lot of listeners are wondering about that. 3 years on the road, pretty formative years, 10 years old to 13 years old. What did you do? You said you brought along math books. Was there any other kind of curriculum, or was it just kind of whatever we discover on the way we'll talk about? How'd that go?
Did your sons journal about their experiences?
Yeah. Apparently it went pretty well, right? Your sons are graduating as engineers this year?
Yeah, they're graduating in a couple of weeks, so that's pretty exciting.
Hooray,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, I know. It's really exciting. I did start out having the boys do journals, but they hated it. I mean, they really did. They really, really hated it. And it was just a fight to get them to do it. And then at one point, well, when we were in Honduras, we needed some stuff, and I actually flew up to Florida to pick stuff up, and then I flew back down. And when I was in Florida, I stayed with a friend of mine, and I was talking to her about this whole journaling thing. And I said, yeah, the kids know how to write. They're both really good writers, but they just hate writing. And she looked at me and said something that has all these years later has stuck with me. And she said, if they know how to write and they are good writers, why are you forcing them to write? I mean,
Simple question.
what is my goal? What am I trying to accomplish with this? If they already know how to do it, then what am I doing?
Yeah.
And that made sense to me. And as long as they know how to do it, then I'm good. So at that point I said, okay, that's absolutely right. Gave up on the journal. At that point, we were only doing it maybe once a week anyway. I mean, I kept a daily journal, but they didn't. I really do believe very strongly that knowing how to write a good 5-paragraph essay is important. Formulate a 5-paragraph essay. You can shrink that down to a good paragraph, or you can expand that into a book. If you understand the concept of what that 5-paragraph essay is, then you can write anything. And so I just decided that was all I would do in terms of writing. And so, if we were somewhere, we went out to the Galapagos Islands, write a 5-paragraph essay about invasive species. And because they understand the structure of it, boom, 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 they can whip it out, do a little bit of research, get a little bit of knowledge, they can whip out a 5-paragraph essay, and they're good. And so I did those kind of consistently. I tried for maybe once a month to have them write a 5-paragraph essay. Again, I mean, it would take maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I mean, once they know how to do it, then they just have to find that information, put it in, and it's done. So we did that. The other thing, we did carry math books. Both of my kids were very, very, very strong in math, and we knew that from a very early age. And we just felt like math was something that they wouldn't get naturally through our journey.
Right.
And they wanted to do math, and so we carried math books. And when they were bored, if we were sitting in a hotel and they were bored, that's what they would do, because that's what they do. I mean, my boys are that's just who they are. They're these engineer, math, geeky kind of kids, and that's just what they do. That's how they get their jollies, and so that was fine.
Fantastic. If only everyone loved math that much.
I know it.
So it sounds to me like a lot of the learning was very experiential. As you went along, they're discovering living history through the places they're visiting. They're discovering their geography, their science, the climate, the atmosphere, historical locations you're going through. And then on the occasion, you're having them write an essay and, think critically about certain topics. I feel like in a lot of ways we put ourselves in a box on how we think education needs to be laid out in order to be right, I guess. There's like a model that is followed. But I feel like learning can happen in so many different ways, and, everyone learns so differently too, and how powerful it is to learn experientially, through living your learning. And I think that that's really inspiring that's what you did with your sons on this journey. It's an understanding that most people probably will never be able to grasp, the kind of learning you can receive from traveling cross continents like you did.
Well, I think too many people have the idea that a school curriculum is this scientifically developed thing where scientifically the best curriculum, the best way to do it is you learn about dinosaurs and five senses in grade 1, and in grade 3 you learn about the phases of the moon and the parts of a flower. And I think we have this idea that there is some sort of scientific basis for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that there isn't. The reality is that those topics were just randomly chosen just because of how easy they were to teach to different grade levels or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So and ultimately, does it really matter if the kids learn about the phases of the moon or if they learn about Mayan architecture? So does it really matter if the kids are learning X? I mean, whatever X is, why is that topic so important? Maybe learning about Mayan or Aztec culture is just as important.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe learning about Argentinian folklore
Mm-hmm.
is just as important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we kind of get lost and we get locked in. One of the things that just drives me nuts is this idea that because the book says that we're doing page 58 today, and page 58 is about the Civil War, but we happen to be in this amazing site from the Revolutionary War, but we're going to learn about the Civil War because the curriculum says today is about the Civil War. And that makes no sense to me. I mean, like, if you are on a Revolutionary War battlefield, then why aren't you learning about the Revolutionary War?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just take advantage of where you are as opposed to being locked into some preconceived random idea for what you should be learning today.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make a very good point.
Yeah. Yeah, Nancy, I know we're kind of running along here, but I know if people want to learn more about your journey, you guys have written a book, you guys have a YouTube channel, and the book's called Changing Gears. I ordered it for myself. I plan to read it as like a bedtime story for my kids, because again, it's part of my dream is to do something to a smaller scale like this, and it's just so glad to listen to all this and hear your story, your testimony of how you guys did it and did such a fantastic way. I'm sure so many people are interested, and I definitely recommend the YouTube channel too. It's very cute videos running around watching all these clips, and just such an awesome journey and such an awesome story, and just so glad that you've taken the time to really share with our audience. And do you have anything last to say or recommend to all our audience?
All I would say is just do it. Don't be afraid to do it. I think our society tells us that we need to do X. Our society tells us that this is what we are expected to do. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if somebody wants to do something else, that's okay too. And I think that we really need to remember that.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to remember that ultimately we only live once, and we have to take advantage of it the best we know how.
Mm.
Awesome. So true. Nancy, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So, Davey, it's a real treat to have you on the show as well. Really curious to hear about your experience. You know, here you are, 10, 11, 12, 13, going on this insanely awesome adventure. How was it for you? What stands out in your mind of some of the most memorable moments?
Wait a minute. Who's the better bicycler, you or your twin?
Me, because I did it on my own bike.
He was just a load on your dad, right?
Yep, exactly.
So what sticks out in your mind of this whole journey? Was it like just this positive memory you look back on, or was this like grueling, painful thing that happened to you?
A bit of both. I mean, there were definitely times it was hard, but for the most part, what you remember are the highlights.
Right.
Things that are better than everything else is what I tend to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom told us this story of a bear chasing after you. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Fun. I don't think it was fun for her. It's fun to talk about later, right?
It is very fun to talk about.
How is Disneyland?
I don't even remember Disneyland.
See, the rest of the world was far more exciting.
Yeah.
Do you think this experience has made you have a much broader outlook of the world where you feel like you could travel any place or, get along with anyone from different cultures around the world? Or do you view certain parts of the world still kind of like as a little intimidating?
Well, I think it mostly comes down to the realization that pretty much everyone is the same. Doesn't really matter what culture you come from.
Mm-hmm.
You're all pretty much the same. And of course, there are going to be places that are different. But for the most part, the general population is the same kind of person. And they're mostly welcoming. Like, we'd go and ask at random people's houses if we could just camp in their backyards. And more often than not, they'd be completely happy to let us do it. They'd give us dinner.
Wow.
And it was great.
That's so cool.
So it's mostly, I think, the realization that the world isn't out to get you. The world's out to help you, if anything.
When you have kids someday, do you consider doing something like this with them?
I would absolutely consider it. Don't know exactly what it would be, but I would definitely do something like it.
Are you glad you could experience both the public education as well as homeschooling experience of this nature?
Yeah, I think that homeschooling is great, but there are definitely limitations to what you can learn. And I think what we did was probably optimal, where you have an early education, just homeschooling, doing what we did. And then once you get to the stuff that is more complicated, like high school math, physics, biology, any of that sort of stuff, that is harder to teach and is more complicated in general, going to public school, I think, is a good way to learn all that.
They have a lot more resources there for you to plug into for those specialized interests. Yeah. I'm curious if you have any other moments that stood out to you on the trip when you think back.
Yeah, there's a few places that come to mind that are highlights. First, probably, I remember Belize. There was sandboarding, which is essentially snowboarding but on a sand dune. And then I remember in Canada, I would be riding alongside just wild animals on the side of the road. Like, I remember one time we were riding next to a bison that was running next to us.
Wow.
That was really fun. There are also a few other parts, like in Argentina, you'd have long stretches of just nothingness, just you and the road, and go days between towns, and just really desolate areas. So there's a lot of very memorable moments like that.
Did you, I feel like for most travelers, they think of the most famous places in a country, and that's what they flock towards to visit, like Machu Picchu, Peru, for instance, or, certain landmarks of that nature. Did you find those places your most memorable, or did you actually enjoy some of the lesser known towns and places you passed through? Did you feel you got a more authentic sense of the culture through those smaller experiences?
The more popular the area, the worse it is. Machu Picchu was awful.
Oh, really?
So many people, and the culture is so geared towards tourism that it's not authentic anymore. Like, sure, you get the gist of what it is, but it's not authentic. There's too many people for you to really get to know it. It's just not fun. The example I like to bring up when I'm talking about this is, I don't remember exactly what ruins they were. I think they were in some more Mayan ruins, but they were a lot less popular and they were off the beaten track, but they actually had like a rope that you could climb up the ruins. Like you could just climb the ruins.
Oh, wow.
Because there weren't enough people that go there that it would destroy it. If you did that on Machu Picchu, it would be destroyed in a week.
Yeah.
But because there's just not the foot traffic there, you could get a lot more you get a lot closer and actually interact with the temples and stuff.
Wow. You essentially were, I guess the term would be unschooling through these past 3 years, which is homeschooling in an immersive situation, not following any particular stringent curriculum. Did you find when you went back to school, you excelled at school? Did it take some ramping up to get used to going back to a more rigorous, straight-lined curriculum? And then over the years, did you find you did perfectly fine anyway? Or how was that educational journey for you?
So I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination. But my take on it, based on everything that I've heard my parents say, my own kind of observations about my education, stuff like that, it doesn't really matter what you learn. It just matters that you're actively thinking about things, especially when you're young. It doesn't matter what facts you can memorize. It matters how your brain develops. And if you're traveling and doing all this stuff that you're always engaged doing something, that is very good for your development. So when I got back to and started doing public school, sure, I didn't know the facts, but I learned them really fast because I had like developed my brain. Like you're just better at thinking than since you've gone through all the critical thinking for years, just traveling around and being engaged constantly. So besides the homework issue that I mentioned before, both me and my brother kind of excelled in everything.
That's awesome. What's your GPA right now in college?
I get 3.5, but
nice.
It's probably going to drop soon because senioritis is the worst.
Well, that's fantastic.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time. We definitely appreciate your story and your perspective on it, and it's definitely a fascinating outlook. And I know for you, it's probably 10 years ago, but yeah, no, definitely a cool thing. So thanks so much for hopping on and adding your contribution.
And no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Awesome.
you.